Savage here instead of Meg. Meg is on vacation this week, so I'm taking over for her. I'll do Finance My Justice. So welcome to Finance 101 webinar series. This webinar series features corporate finance. So this is a long part in the webinar series. We have a couple more coming up. Check Handshake for all the upcoming webinars that are going to be happening. The more recent ones are going to be on finance recruiting too. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about the fall semester and getting ready. We also have webinars in technology and consulting as well happening as well. So thanks for being here. In terms of visual aid, if you hit in the top right corner speaker view, it'll just show the speakers. You want to see quite as many little blobs as you're navigating through here. And procedurally too, if you have any questions about the session, feel free to pop them in the chat. If you're there, just for John, so he kind of knows who's here today, if you're able to put in the chat now your school year and what major you are, just so he kind of knows what students we have on the call, that'd be helpful, just as he's thinking through the students that are here. But we'll go ahead and get started and welcome our alum that's here today. John, thank you so much for being here virtually with us while you're at work and talking to us about corporate finance. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your major when you were here at UVA, and how you got started in the field?
Sure. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I am wearing a mask first because I am at work, Procter & Gamble. I'll take it off so you know what I look like. So I have to drink water when I take it off, because I can only take it off if I'm eating or drinking. So that's the policy now. It's probably not a surprise to you guys. But no, I graduated UVA in '93. I was an economics major. My summers while I was in school, I was actually selling books door to door. So I was a door to door salesman, which is probably something that doesn't happen so much anymore over the summer. And then when I was getting ready to graduate, just looking at companies, honestly, I wasn't sure on what field I wanted to go into, but just looking at companies to interview with. And so Procter & Gamble was one of the companies I interviewed with right out of undergrad, and the interview went well. And I started my corporate finance career at P&G in 1993, later that summer. So in terms of my career, and I don't want to spend too long in the introduction, but just to go through it rather quickly, I did some very traditional startup kind of first assignment roles with Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati. So as you may know, we're a large consumer products company. We make products like Charmin. So the operations I'm in now actually makes Charmin and Bounty. So as you can imagine, we're making as much as we can, as fast as we can right now. But we make products like Tide and Swiffer and Febreze, Crest toothpaste, others. So a large consumer products company based in Cincinnati, Ohio.
It looks like we might have frozen, so we'll give John just a second. There we go.
You got it?
Yep, you're back.
I'm back? Okay.
You're back. All we heard was Cincinnati is the last thing we heard you say, and then it kind of went fuzzy.
Okay. So I started in Cincinnati doing traditional first assignment roles, internal audit, forecasting, analysis. And then 5 years in, I went to my first operations role, which was a controller of an operations facility in Augusta, Georgia, working on the Tide business. And really, since that assignment, I've really spent a lot of my career in operations. So think about manufacturing, warehousing, the supply chain side of the business. And so for the past, call it 15, 20 years, I've done a lot of assignments on location where we make our products, some back in Cincinnati, and worked a little bit in Latin America on some sourcing and siting of our operations in Latin America. So that's just a quick tour through my career. And I've been recruiting back at UVA most of those years as well. So really happy to do this afternoon with all of you.
Awesome. And could you remind me, what did you study when you were here at UVA?
I was an economics major. I was an environmental science minor, and really liked the freedom that staying in the college gave me in terms of coursework and with my schedule. So that's how I did it. If I could do it all over again, I'd probably do the same thing.
I love that, which brings up great. We have Jen Jones on the call from Economics Career Services. This event is sponsored in part by her as well. So thank her for being here, and thank her for helping get you John to volunteer, which was great. We're happy to have you. So part of this is a little bit about learning about finance sort of in layman's terms. So in terms of what corporate finance is, how would you define what that is for our students who are exploring the financial industry?
Right. Corporate finance, I would say, is responsible for providing strategy, to the business. You know, in my role working for a publicly traded company, I say a lot in the meetings or with my partners, I work for the shareholder, right? So there's people in the room that work for HR and they're about hiring their employees, or engineers are solving the problem, or, you know, brand management might be coming up with a marketing strategy. I'm really trying to represent the shareholder. So in that capacity, I'm trying to help us make the best decisions for the business that grow our value, right? And that often coincides with other functions, right? Like making sure that we have the best marketing plans or make the right capital investments with our engineers. But sometimes there are conflicts, right? Sometimes we want to make investments that maybe grow the top line, but don't generate profit. And then we need to, you know, evaluate those further. And so you're really doing the work to try to make sure that we're making the best balanced decision to grow the sales of the organization, but also maintain profitability. That's it in a nutshell, you know, versus other careers I might have looked at, or you might be looking at coming out of school. You know, investment banking, financial services, things like that are certainly popular and good places to start. But most of the jobs are in corporate finance, right? If you just think about products that you buy every day or services that you use every day, those companies have finance departments that are really providing that strategic input to the business model to make sure that those investors or those shareholders are being continually represented and rewarded with their investment in that company.
I think you just piqued interest, John, because you said opportunities, and I think that students are definitely hungry for that. So that's good to hear that there's a good market in corporate finance. You mentioned that economics, and you would do it all over again within that major. Could you speak to a little bit about how your liberal arts major and education helped support you in this role within the financial services industry?
Sure. I mean, I think the economics degree in particular was a great balance between analytical thinking and problem solving. So difficult problems, difficult coursework, a lot of math, right? And a lot of logic, but also a lot of writing and communication, and the balance of the liberal arts degree in my minor as well taught me to think, to write, to communicate effectively in person, but also in writing. And I think that broader set of skills, you know, served me well coming out and probably still serves me well today, I think, versus a major that is more technical, whether it's, you know, my kids are engineering majors, for example. So that's a technical major. And the risk is you come out of that major really, really smart on the technology, but not really sure how to communicate it or convince other people of your position, right? Because maybe you didn't have as many writing, maybe you didn't have as much public speaking courses or things like that. Similarly in the comm school, honestly, I do a lot of recruiting at the comm school and great students, but once you get into the comm school, it does limit the curriculum that you can take. And so I think, you know, having a broader education certainly helped me quite a bit. And I continue to see that as I recruit and hire students, you know, from UVA or other schools as I continue my career. You get a lot of value from top liberal arts educations that is maybe more well-rounded. It sounds cliche, but has a broader skill set coming in beyond a technical major that I might have gone for.
That's super helpful. Were there any skill sets, John, that you felt like you had to get sort of outside of your coursework that students could be thinking about within corporate finance specifically that maybe wasn't covered in the coursework that would be helpful within the recruiting process?
Yeah, I think, well, in the liberal arts or the College of Arts and Sciences, a course you can take or a course you might want to take is, you know, some accounting, one accounting course, 101, 201, whatever it is, just to indicate interest and get a little bit of background is helpful. But outside the coursework, certainly analytical skills that you might get in a major would be very helpful. So for example, if you're doing psych and soc and working a lot with stats, you know, develop that big data analytical capability. There's a lot of emerging tools, seems like new tools every year on how to analyze behavior, how to analyze consumer behavior or individual behavior. I mean, that's what companies like P&G do, right? We want to understand people's behavior so that we can make products that serve those consumers better. So, but using data to make those decisions is what we're interested in. So we want folks that can use data. So I think, you know, starting with Excel, but things like Power BI or Tableau or tools that you can use to analyze and visualize data that might apply to any course or any major are good skills to develop. And then I think, in your on-grounds activities, if you're interested in business and finance, show that through what you're doing on ground. So if you're part of an organization, are you driving the strategy? Are you growing membership? Are you increasing fundraising? Are you the treasurer? I mean, are there things that you can do that show an interest maybe outside the classroom in growing a business, in the financials, in the value creation? I think those go a long way for students, that if you read the resume, it doesn't necessarily say, oh, obviously this is a corporate finance person, right? But if you talk to a psych major that's got a good analytical capabilities and understands consumer behavior, that could be very interesting to any company, or a company like P&G that wants to understand that behavior with an analytical or a data-based approach.
Yeah, well, I think the importance you mentioned of data, I think we're a data-driven society these days. So those skill sets are, I think, essential across industry too, which is great to think about it for finance as well. That's really good advice. So in terms of your likes and challenges, what are some challenges that you face within your role within the field overall? But what's your favorite thing about your job? What do you love about it?
I mean, the reason I've gravitated towards the supply chain and operations is, well, first let me back up. I mean, I think P&G, I mean, a bit of a commercial, but obviously people say, well, do you like it, or what do you like best about it? Well, I'd be stupid if I stayed here 27 years and didn't like coming to work every day, right? So I do like the company. I think you do need to find a company, number one, that you understand their purpose, you understand their values, and when you meet the people that work there, you can enjoy being with those people and impressed being with those people day in, day out. I think if you don't get that feel through the recruiting process, it's probably not the company for you, because you do spend a lot of time with these people. So I think that's, that's what might attract you to a company. That's what might retain you. I mean, for me specifically, operations is almost even more about the people, right? So there are, if I contrast it, there could be a very high-level corporate strategy or analytical role in headquarters that's really looking at the big data and trying to craft corporate strategy. That may be a relatively small, highly skilled team, and really interesting work. I mean, the reason I like operations is because there's over 1,000 people here in the building with me, and we're all working on making the product the consumers buy every day, executing the plans, and that takes a lot of leadership, right? That takes a lot of influencing, leadership, communication, walking the walk, talking the talk. So you have to be able to work well with individuals, help them in their careers, find ways to be a servant leader. How can I make them perform better, or make them want to perform better, which makes the company perform better? So if you like, working with people, working in groups, that sort of thing, you might gravitate towards operations like I have. So that's what I like about the operations side of the business. But I've had other roles, right? So I've had those corporate roles. I spent 11 years in corporate headquarters as well. And those are very challenging roles. But I think what I like best about where I am now is, most people that are here in this building are hourly people, right? They come on shift. They're coming in second shift right now. And P&G provides their livelihood, and probably they stay here for their career, right? And helping them progress, helping them understand the strategy, helping them stay motivated and improve their skills so they can improve their results, is what motivates me, I guess, on a daily basis.
Yeah, so you just mentioned skills. So in terms of skills, what do you suggest students gain, like skills specifically, to get a better understanding for the field? So you mentioned data visualization, you mentioned Tableau and Excel. I think there's skills that you'd recommend people focus on for corporate finance specifically.
I mean, in addition to those skills, I would go back to, being able to write clearly, succinctly, business writing. Certainly communication has gotten more casual, right? And I think corporate needs to recognize that, right? We can't continue to demand, a one-page memo for everything. So of course, we do business on text or, Skype or whatever the medium is, email, and it can be relatively informal. But even an informal communication needs to be clear and have a point, because there's a lot of communication, right? Students are getting bombarded with communication as well. I know I've got a son that's starting a first year in college, and I ask him, has he checked his email? Like, it's been a few days. I'm like, David, it can't be a few days. Like, you need to check your email every day, right? So you're getting a lot of it, you're getting a lot of communication, and being able to write clearly and communicate back, whatever the medium is, I think is really important. In addition to being able to make a pitch, right? Whether it's, just in a room in an office or one-to-one with your manager, or in a room full of people, or giving a presentation. You do need to find ways, I think, to be comfortable doing that in corporate finance, right? Because you are driving the strategy, you are trying to change people's point of view, maybe with data, and that's not going to happen just with an email or just, with a well-written memo. It's going to happen verbally. If you're not as interested in that, then, maybe a more analytical role, maybe even something like accounting, right? Which, go more technical, right? But if you're looking to be in corporate finance, you do need to be able to make those pitches. The other thing is being able to collaborate with, people from all over the world, from all different spectrums, and understand, maybe listen first, and then, seek to be understood. Those sorts of things. UVA is very good about that. UVA brings in a very diverse population. The professors are great. So I think you're going to get that if you're at UVA, but recognize that applies very clearly in the workplace. And it's a very simple reason why. If you're in business like P&G and you're trying to sell to the world's consumers, you need to understand the many different points of view. You have employees that understand that, and then you need to bring plans in place that speak to those consumers in a way that they care about. So I think being able to listen, maybe change your point of view. I ask that question in interviews a lot. Give me a time when listening to someone else's point of view has changed your point of view. And if a student can't answer that question, they may think about it for a minute, but if they can't ultimately answer it, maybe they're not listening. Maybe they're not open-minded, right? So I think those are things that are, they're maybe softer skills, but they're important skills to have, whether it's finance or any other discipline.
Ooh, could you repeat that question? I love that.
It is the one where students usually stop and maybe ask for it. Hey, can I come back to that?
Yeah.
I ask them, tell me about a time when listening to someone else's point of view changed your point of view.
Ooh, I like that. That's a really good question. And students, I did that for you, so you kind of put that in the back of your brain. So keep that in mind. And so on the vein of that, of interviews, think recruitment is a big just point of area of stress. If you could sort of, in hindsight, what would you tell yourself about recruitment in terms of getting yourself prepared for it, if you could go back and do that?
Yeah, maybe something I would have underestimated, or students underestimate, is how important the online applications are now. I think especially given where we are with the pandemic, and the inability to maybe travel to campus or grounds and come in and do the in-person sessions, right? I'm not sure those will happen this fall. And even before that, the online application with P&G is a pass-fail proposition. And I think many companies are probably that way, and many students probably don't realize it. So to kind of say it casually, don't take the online assessment, Friday morning after going out to a mixer on Thursday night. It's probably not a good idea. I mean, treat it like a test, right? So if you're serious about that company, because we're going to ask you not only your profile and to submit your resume, but we're going to give you some problem solving questions. We're going to give you some questions about how you like to do work and how do you get things done. And so in a certain sense, it's a test, right? And then we sort our candidates based on that application. And we're a company that gets a lot of candidates. So it's important. That's very important. I would say the other thing is having a connection at the company makes all the difference. There's many recent, UVA alum over the past many years that have at least gotten the interview with P&G because they knew me and they met me in a forum like this, or at an event that Jen hosted, because we get so many, right? We get so many applications, and many people pass the online application and they look great. But if you have someone you can reach back out to and say, hey, John, I applied at P&G. Can you let me know where my application is? I can look and see if you've passed the application. And if you have, I can call recruiting and say, hey, can we generate, an interview for this person? So I think those networking communications that probably students have heard about, that networking is important, along with the importance of the online application. So, having someone to follow up with, I guess, is important. So that, that's something maybe I wish I knew then, or probably a lot of students, do well, but then some probably, just don't realize how important that can be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. And you mentioned sort of the virtual interviewing settings. So on that sort of similar vein, do you have any strategies for students as they approach virtual recruiting in a virtual environment? I mean, we're looking at all virtual interviews in the fall, we're looking at virtual career fairs and programs. Just any advice or insight for students on how to get ready for that or strategies for that?
Yeah, and I do sympathize, because it's going to be difficult, right? Because I do the interviews, and that first impression when you meet the person and you build rapport for a couple of minutes, it is important, right? You can right away get a sense of comfort with the interview on both sides, right? So missing that, and even doing something like this, I think it's going to be hard to replicate, right? So I think in that environment, it's all the more important. I mean, some advice I sometimes give that I think is even more important now is, have your best 5, 6, 7 stories lined up, right? So no matter what the question is. So you need to know your resume, and there may be some things that aren't on your resume. But if you volunteer for an organization and had a really compelling experience helping in the community, and you think that's a good story, find a way to tell it. It doesn't matter if I ask about leadership or problem solving or creativity. You can probably find a way to make that story fit that question. And honestly, once I've asked the question, I don't usually go back and double click and say, well, they didn't answer exactly leadership, or that was more of a creativity answer than a problem solving answer. Honestly, I'm just trying to get 7 stories myself, right? So if I'm doing a behavioral interview, so have them lined up, and I would balance them between, as you can, school experiences, so maybe academic or group work at school or things like that, internship or work, employment, and then volunteer or on grounds activities. And, it's okay to pull from all 3. But I would have those examples that speak to, the attributes that you want to highlight, which most commonly are things like leadership, problem solving, collaboration, creativity, in a behavioral interview. Doing a case interview virtual, I don't know. I mean, I guess, yeah, I don't know how I think most of the interviews that I hear about are more behavioral anyways. And so if that works, that's the advice that I would give is know your stories. And you're going to get a couple of curveballs, like the question I just posed about, changing your point of view, right? So you do have to be ready for those, but probably if you have your stories, 80% of the questions you'll be able to fit your examples into.
Totally. Those curveballs always happen. There's always at least one in an interview. You're like, I had not prepared for that. That's a really great question. Thank you for asking it. So that's a great example. So, due to COVID, obviously many students have lost their internships or experiences they had prepared for over the summer. Any advice that you have for them of ways they can be spending their downtime? Jen posted some great Coursera classes that students can take, but just any advice about how they can get ready for their career path?
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of a great time to think, right? And pause and kind of assess what you really want to do. So I think that is a good question. I know it's on the list here. I think showing that you're still trying to move yourself forward is important, right? That and maybe that you have taken some time to do some critical thinking and, either read more or taken more online, coursework to improve your technical skills in some way, self-taught yourself something online. You can network, right? You can do things like this, and kind of do more research because you're not busy with all the other activities. So maybe you can be better informed about the company or the industry that you're interested in. So I think those are things that maybe this helps a little bit with, being a better prepared student to talk to an employer or know more about them because you've had time to do more research. Again, you're not necessarily having all the pulls on your time that you normally would because of COVID. Do look. I mean, it's a terrible time, and people are getting sick, and it's in many ways it's very, very tragic. And there's opportunity in it as well. So how can whatever company or industry you're thinking of going into come out stronger? How can they help? How can they learn from this experience? Using all these virtual tools is a good example, but the mask I'm wearing is something that P&G made, right? So we can make masks, we can make hand sanitizer, we can learn to serve consumers touchless, right? Not bringing them into the store, which is something that after this passes, ongoing benefits, right? To learning about how industry or how business survives and maybe even thrives during a crisis, right? So it's a good opportunity to learn, and then maybe also think about how to give back, right? I think a lot of people are thinking about, well, this, how can I help, right? So I think if you're able to contribute to or volunteer for a cause that you care about because you've got time to do that now, is there a way to show that, right? To show the compassion and how you're helping, or it's a good question even for companies, right? So how are you helping, or how are you responding, or how are you surviving, right, during this pandemic? And it'll depend on the industry. It'll be very different by industry. I mean, P&G is making a lot of products that frankly are not on the shelf right now because they're in very high demand, but some of our other businesses are really struggling. And so, asking companies how they're thinking about that and how they can come out stronger is probably a good question for them as you get into the process.
I think that's great advice, John. And Jen, I saw just gave a thumbs up too, a question we hadn't really thought about. So students, that's a great takeaway to be thinking about a good question. And students, if you have additional questions, pop them in the chat. I've got one more or two more, and Jen may pop in too, but please feel free, pop the questions in the chat. Happy to ask those to John as well. Sort of in summary, John, from our list here, is there anything else that you would like to share with the students about your career path, how you got where you are, just general advice you'd like to share with them?
Okay. Maybe a little bit of repeat, but as you're going through the process, and I know it's a tough time to go through, I think there's some comforting things to remember. One is, if you're on this call and you're at UVA, I mean, you really are at one of the best places in the world to prepare you for success in your field, right? And I don't think that you need to know what that field is, right now, right? Whether you're a first year or a fourth year, you've got time. So I think, take comfort in that.
Unfortunately, John, you froze in the middle of that advice, so we're going to give him a second to come back.
You look like you froze. Okay.
Yep.
Am I back?
We're back. Yep.
Okay. So on the interview process, make sure that you are interviewing the employer and ask them the tough questions. And maybe that means you turn down something. Maybe you go through an interview and you don't have a great feeling about it. You don't maybe like the way that the interviewer approached you in the interview, whatever the vibe is. But if you go through that and you get the offer, but you don't love the company, maybe think twice about it, and make sure you're asking them the tough questions as you go through, and I guess be choiceful. In terms of just more perspective on my career, I do think graduating from UVA and being able to come back and reconnect with the university has been rewarding. So I've been able to stay in touch through recruiting. And I really do believe the university prepares you very, very well. And in terms of, the career path of corporate finance, I've really enjoyed it, and it's kind of fit with my analytical side when I was coming out of school, and I kind of got lucky, I think, that I found a company and a field that stuck. But it could just as easily have been that, I started with the company and I got the job in corporate finance, but once I got in, market research or brand management or sales or something else looked more interesting. And I think that's fine too. So my advice would be, maybe do emphasize on the employer and not necessarily the exact job title or function when you get in. Because I can tell you, and P&G is a pretty traditional company in the way that we manage our work, but P&G has been doing a lot more cross-functional moves. So people that are with the company but want to change their focus. It's a fairly easy thing to do. And I think that's generally probably true in many other companies. Once they get a strong employee in, they want to keep you happy as the employee. So if you want to give brand management a try or sales, you can move functions in probably.
I think that's good advice, John, thinking about just like moving around. I think that's good advice students to be learning more about. There you go. You're back. The organization itself and just sort of what different components there are where you might want to move to. So I think that's great advice. Was there anything else, John, you were adding at the end of that?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, awesome. The Zoom life sometimes can be challenging. So we got 2 questions in the chat from students, which I think is awesome. Thank you, students. So if you were a rising second year student, what things would you do to put yourself ahead of your peers in terms of knowledge and job and internship placement?
I mean, rising second year, you've got everything in front of you, right? So couple things. I would definitely make sure that, you've already found something or you find something at the beginning of the school year on grounds on how to contribute. I mean, as an alum coming back to UVA, I wanted to meet students that were really embracing the university, right? And not just going to class, right? So I think at the point you are in your career right now as a student, find something you're passionate about on grounds and really take a leadership role and drive that. It can be as important as your academics. In terms of increasing the odds for internships, if that's really what you're focused on, after your second year, that can be a little bit harder depending on the industry you want to go into. So, or even the major. For finance internships at P&G, it's almost all rising third years, right? So it's rising fourth years is where we bring most people in. But for engineering, we might bring someone in year after year after year, even as a first year, and kind of getting multiple experiences with the business as an engineer. So maybe, through career services or through your research on the companies that you're interested in or the industry that you're interested in, find out who's willing to offer the internship for a second year. And you'll find some that normally do and some that don't, and just focus on those, those industries or those businesses that do.
It seems sometimes if I talk, he comes back after I start to talk. So I'm going to try that again. It worked. It worked again. Sorry, no, at the end of that, you cut out for just a second.
Okay. So I was advising the students to sharpen their focus. Did you hear that? And just focus on, getting their major lined up if they haven't done that by the end of second year.
Beautiful. That's great advice. I think on that same sort of vein, a question here is, what was your personal experience in regards to internships and clubs during your time at the University of Virginia?
Yeah, so internships, I didn't do internships. I worked as a waiter after my first year, and then I actually sold books door to door, so educational books door to door for 3 summers for a company called Southwestern that I know still exists because sometimes the students come to my door. But I think that business is probably not as robust as it used to be. But what that experience showed employers is that I could run a business because I was, selling. I was working hard physically, working 6 days a week, managing all the money, managing the inventory, and generating a pretty good, you could make pretty good numbers selling books at that point in time. So it was a pretty impressive sales and profit for the summer. So, but it was not an internship in an office environment or in a corporate environment. So looking back, I guess I haven't really thought about that. Probably didn't show maybe the analysis or the strategy experiences that maybe other interns had, but it did show hard work, and it did show entrepreneurship and creativity, and being able to influence, right, to sell. So I think those are probably the skills that showed on my resume. So I guess that maybe the lesson there is you don't have to get the internship. You don't have to get the banking internship or the corporate strategy internship to necessarily have a good summer experience. I can tell you more recently, and I've got kids that are, ages 19 to 23, so they're kind of right in the same area. 2 out of my 3 kids volunteered at a camp, Carefree, which provides a week every summer for kids with terminal or chronic illnesses. And it's a volunteer position, it's unpaid, but of course the work they did there resonated really well with many employers in terms of, helping people, service, relationships, that sort of thing. So it wouldn't be an experience that necessarily you might think would land you the internship or the job, but a lot of employers will appreciate, something like that as well. So I would say do what your passion is, and if it's a formal internship, great, but if not, you can get another good, summer experience.
That's great advice. I got one other question here. It's a really good one too. So can you walk us through a project an entry-level analyst would undertake within the corporate finance industry?
Sure. So I can use a real example. So I had a student come work for me. It's been a couple of years now, but right out of school in January, UT Austin. So another good school, not quite as good as UVA, but a good school nonetheless. And, right away we could tell that he had a lot of potential. He was in a role where he was responsible for the budget and forecast for the last operation I was in, and doing some financial analysis on projects for us. But what we needed was someone for the North America region to lead an upgrade of our forecast and actual cost analysis system for all of our manufacturing facilities. So globally, P&G's got over 100 manufacturing facilities. And so we needed a leader for each region. And he was brand new to the company, but showed a lot of promise. And so, we gave him the project. And I'm a believer that, you can kind of give someone opportunity and challenge until they kind of prove to you they can't handle it. And he just blew it out of the water. He ended up really providing a global leadership role for the project, excellent results, huge productivity gains for our operations accounting systems. I mean, ultimately, these are systems that are handling, hundreds of millions of dollars for the company. And so, we gave him that project, didn't have a lot of structure to it. He needed to organize calls and trainings and set a critical path schedule and make sure that all the technical issues were resolved. And he couldn't do all the work himself, but he found a way to, help others, get the job done. So, that was kind of an above and beyond project that we would give someone that showed, a strong start with the company. And there would be many other examples, but my advice coming in, if you want that kind of challenge, is be great at what you're given day one, whatever the job description is, and go out and meet people. I always tell new hires, if you're sitting at your desk and you're frustrated for more than 10 minutes, you're missing the boat, right? Get up, ask me, call me, ask someone else, because we don't expect you to know everything day one or even day 20 or day 50, but we do expect you to take the initiative and go get help, go figure it out. Don't
I think that's great advice from John on just asking for help when
So
you
I
need it.
stopped.
There you go. You stopped it. Don't. And I think you're gonna say don't stop. Don't wait until you realize it's too challenging. But I wasn't sure, so I was trying to fill it in for you.
Don't get frustrated. Don't wait too long. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you, John. And any other questions, students? We got about 20 minutes left. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. John, I guess one question I have for you that's not on the list, but I'm just curious about is when you were going through recruitment, how'd you decide corporate finance over all the different options in the financial industry you could have gone? Like, how'd you decide this was the track for you with P&G?
Yeah, it's a really good question because I actually took parallel tracks when I started the interview process. So given my background in selling, I was also interviewing for sales jobs and maybe more sales than finance. And even specifically with P&G, I could apply to P&G sales or finance. I actually applied both and the company chose to pursue me for finance. So it turned out to be a good fit. I think now that I know the company better, so it was a good call. But I did like the analytics, the strategy. I was a little concerned, honestly, like maybe a lot of undergrad, class students might be about, well, do I have the right classes or experience to be competitive with MBAs or comm school students? So I was nervous even when I got the job and showed up at work that I was working with people that had a more formal education specifically for the job that I was going into. And it took me some time to be confident and just get the results and realize that, I could learn a lot on the job. So that was something I went through and came out, successful on the other end of. That's okay. I think you can learn from those people that come in with, the MBAs or, more experience than you, and you can, most companies, especially I think in the corporate, I go back to, we all work for the shareholder. It's maybe not as cutthroat as you would seem, right? So I think I found people very helpful, even people that technically I might've been competing for roles with. That's probably also honestly a function of working for a larger company. So sometimes I get the question, what's great about working for a big company and what's terrible about it? Well, one of the things that's great about it is, I'm a finance director at P&G, and there's a lot of finance directors at P&G, and there's a lot of vice presidents, and there's a lot of opportunity to be successful as your peers are also successful, right? So that is one of the benefits of going to a large company. Is I think it probably tends to be a little less competitive and cutthroat. Not that it is competitive. We do perform against each other and get rated against each other, and salary plans are not all the same. But I think it's probably, there is a chance for many people to be successful, right? And so, that I took your question a little bit further, but I'm just thinking about, you made me think about the feelings I had when I started, and I wasn't entirely comfortable, right?
Mm-hmm.
I thought, well, maybe it would have been easier if I was just in sales, because I'm good at sales. I know I can sell things and it's not technical. But once I was in several months, a year, I felt like I was doing fine.
Yeah, that's that imposter syndrome, right? I think that's really common to sort of feel that way of like, man, do I have what I need to be here? And obviously they saw something in you and or to push you maybe out of your comfort zone. I think that's common to sort of help with that. I think a lot of times people want to fall into what they're comfortable with, but it's getting pushed sometimes. So I'm glad that worked out for you. That's awesome. Last question in here is, what has been your path with P&G? Where did you start and why did you move up?
Okay. So I started in Cincinnati physically, right? So that's where our headquarters is. And I started on a rotation doing what I would call pretty traditional early assignment roles. So internal controls, so audit. So every large publicly traded company has an internal audit function. And that's like, think of that as a consulting job, but working for the company that you're advising, right? So it's internal consulting in a certain sense. So a lot of travel, looking at a lot of different parts of the business. So that was kind of a good early assignment, and did that. Did forecasting and financial analysis on the Crest business, the toothpaste business, for North America, right? So kind of single region forecasting, also relatively early in my career. and then did an assignment on new business development, right? So companies like P&G are always looking for the next new thing. And actually, Jen held up something that we were working on when I started with a company called Swiffer. So Swiffer didn't exist 25 years ago, but it was part of the portfolio of projects that we were working on when I was in new business development. And it might surprise you, most of our sales don't come from new businesses, right? They come from selling more Bounty and more Charmin and more Tide and kind of expanding the ways in which we represent those brands. So you can find Tide in different forms now. You can find Gain Sense in Febreze. And so anyway, but some of our new sales do come from entirely new products and businesses. And I worked on that relatively early. So things like Swiffer, Febreze was actually in that portfolio. And the product I worked the most on was called Thermacare, which actually still exists, but we sold it. And so that was a little more entrepreneurial, a little more further out, right? It wasn't like, hey, what are we selling next month? Or what does the quarter look like? It's like, wow, in 5 years, what are going to be the new products that are on shelf, the new categories that don't exist that P&G will lead in? And so those assignments really encompassed my first roughly 5 years, all in Cincinnati, Ohio. And then I did get into operations. So I went to Augusta, Georgia as the plant controller there for a dry laundry plant for 3 years, did a similar job at Albany, Georgia for a Bounty Charmin facility there. And then came back to Cincinnati onto the Iams business. So people might know Iams is a pet food, right? Iams in Eukanuba, premium pet foods. We had just bought the business, so it was an acquisition and we were doing the integration. So that was an interesting project because I didn't do the deal, but once you do the deal, you've got to integrate the company, integrate the financial systems, you bought it for a reason, right? So you're trying to grow the business. And that was really fun because we actually doubled that business soon after we bought it. The big insight there was distribution. So it was a brand that had been captive to pet stores. And we used our distribution network with Walmart and others to bring that brand to large retailers. And just the distribution pretty much doubled the business. So I worked on that deal. And then I did a global beauty care supply chain role where we were analyzing our supply chain for all of our beauty products across the globe and trying to improve efficiency. So we were opening new plants, negotiating with suppliers, doing things like that. And then I really was ready for something outside of Cincinnati. So I went to Greensboro, North Carolina. And while I was in Greensboro, I was there for 10 years. So I had a wide range of responsibilities, but at points in time was providing leadership for 5 plants. Both I think I might have lost you. I'm gonna wait. Did I lose you?
Okay, you did just for a second. Yep.
Yeah. While I was in Greensboro, I was doing some global supply chain analysis, primarily in Latin America. So I was down in Brazil and Panama fairly frequently, working on a more emergent business there to set up supply chains. And so I did a variety of roles while I was physically in Greensboro, North Carolina. That's really where my kids were raised. So we tried to stay there a longer period of time. And then I just moved. So I am day 2 in the office that I'm in right now. So I just moved from North Carolina up to, I'm calling you from northern Pennsylvania, actually. And I'm now at P&G's largest global operations facility, which is up here. And we make Bounty, Charmin, Pampers, and Loves up here, but it's actually our largest global facility. So.
Well, congrats on the new digs. Day 2. That's exciting.
Yeah. It was so, I know it's challenging to recruit during COVID. It was very challenging to sell, buy houses in different markets with all the restrictions and physically move during this. So I don't recommend it.
I can't even imagine the virtual home tour process and all that. Yeah. That sounds like a lot of new technology. So yeah. There was one more question, if we have time for it, sure. John, that came in, and a little about the work-life balance for entry-level employees. And your expectation for their work as a manager, like how many hours per day, like weekends, like what that like work-life balance looks like.
No, that's a good, very good question. I think one of the ways to learn about that from an employer, as you're looking at employers, right, and how they treat that is, talk to a few employees, talk to some entry-level employees, so maybe you know what it's really like. And usually at P&G, we would set you up when it's not virtual with a dinner or a lunch with a new employee, so you could really get the scoop. Maybe now that could be a phone call. But the other thing is kind of, as you meet folks at the company, have they been there a lot of years, right? So, and Procter & Gamble does do promote from within. So there's a lot of people like me that have been at the company a long time, because we don't bring in executives laterally. We bring everybody in at the entry levels. And so one of the things that's a necessity if you do that is you do have to have balance, right? Because people aren't going to work a full career 80 hours a week, not a normal person, right? Because they're going to have dual career, they may have children, even if they don't, they may want to travel. They're going to have their interests outside of work. And so the way I treat that is, there are hours when I expect you to be here Monday to Friday, right? Say roughly 8 to 5. And get your work done. If you want to leave at 4 on Friday and you're done, you leave at 4. And I think a lot of companies are that way, where they're not so much watching the clock. They also recognize, and maybe COVID has accelerated a little bit, but of course I'm always available, right? I mean, I've got my phone, I look at my email over the weekend or at night. And so there's a lot of people that are doing work, even if it's just, in 5 or 10 or 15-minute increments, when they're not in the office, right? So I think maybe even in that sense, it's gotten a little more balanced, because you don't have to physically be here if you need to leave at 4 o'clock for an appointment, or it's a doctor's appointment, or you're going to meet a friend, or you're coaching your kids' sport. It doesn't mean you can't log back on at 8 o'clock and knock out work for an hour, right? And so I think most companies are pretty flexible on that. I mean, you can look up P&G. We usually rate extremely high on those kind of metrics. Working women in particular, we get very high results. And so I think, that's in a certain sense, I may be actually working more hours during the week, because I'm kind of on all the time, at least checking stuff, but I'm not in the office, for a long time. I think make sure your boss or your company knows that's important to you. That's a good question to ask during the interview. What's the work-life balance? What about flexible work schedules? What if there was a point in time where I needed to work less than full time? What about leaves of absence? What about things like that? It's good to do some of that research. And again, I think most companies will have some good policies in place around that. And I wouldn't necessarily shy away from asking those questions if it's important to you, because you don't want to not ask the question, make an assumption, and then you get there and you realize, hey, we're, mandatory 60-hour weeks for some reason. And then you think, well, gosh, I'm not up for that. So.
That's awesome. Okay. Well, John, thank you so much for taking the time. It was so great to get to know you and hear your perspective. And students, thanks for great questions and great engagement. This was really helpful, and I'm sure was really helpful for students in thinking through this process. So thank you, John, for your time, and congrats on your new role, your new office, and your new.
Thank you.
And thank you for the mask. I think it's a good representation of how things might look in the future for students in recruiting. So it's a good experience for them.
Good. All right. Well, thank you for setting it up. It was good to meet you. It's good to see you again, Jen. And thanks to all the students for joining.